Welcome back, folks. This is second program in my series called Moderate Fundamentalists, which is named after the title of my book, Moderate Fundamentalists, Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at in the Lens of Cognitive Science of Religion, whose copies you see right here behind me. And it was published by DeGruyter Press in 2017. So I read pages 1 through 8 in the first reading. So in the second program, now I'm going to read pages 13 through 22. Scholarly studies of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at. The origin and spread of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at has confounded both historians and scholars of religion. A curious religious phenomena in Indian Islam has been the advent of Ahmadiyya movement, wrote the eminent scholar of Islam, Fazlur Rahman. Historians remain baffled as to how a group that is regarded as so outside mainstream of Islam attracted enough followers to remain viable until now, said scholar of religion Shazia Ahmad in 2010. Reviewing Friedman's book Prophecy Continuous, which deals with Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's various claims, Fussfeld wrote in 1992, "The relationship between the Ahmadiyya movement and the political, economic, and social environment, as distinct from its intellectual origins, is largely unexplored. There is never any satisfactory explanation offered to show why the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement chose to take positions that were so outlandish when viewed from the perspective of mainstream Islam. How he benefited from taking a position on the finality of prophethood that many other Islamic leaders viewed as beyond the acceptable boundaries of Islam. Why the Ahmadiyya came to be in such an unorthodox, and from the point of view of other Muslims, unacceptable positions." This is from Fussfeld, 1992, pages 347 through 348. Fussfeld faulted the traditional approach to new religious movements for its shortcomings to explain the origin and growth by exclusively appealing to sociological factors. The Ahmadiyya movement was to a large extent the result of one person's view of the world he found and his efforts to come to grips with the problems he perceived. If the solution was a peculiar one, it may owe its peculiarity to the person who made it work, said Fussfeld in 1992 on page 348 of his book. Ahmadiyya is not the only religious movement to have been influenced so profoundly by the radically innovative ideas of its founder. Many new religious movement (NRM) founders, such as Joseph Smith, Sun Myung Moon, and Mary Baker Eddy, appear to have based their respective movements on similar innovations. Joseph Smith, 1805 to 1844, claimed to be a prophet and apostle of Jesus Christ, unquote. He also claimed to have received divine knowledge of the journey of a group of Israelites into the Western Hemisphere. Smith believed that he was given special powers to interpret this lost knowledge into English. Using these powers, he composed the Book of Mormon, which is considered scripture by most members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Mary Baker Eddy, who lived from 1821 to 1910, claimed to be a God-appointed messenger, unquote, who was chosen by God to give, quote, full and final revelation of truth, unquote. According to the doctrine of Church of Christian Science, quote, she is so closely related to Christian Science that a true sense of her is essential to the understanding of Christian Science. In other words, the revelator cannot be separated from the revelation, unquote. Similar to Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, Sun Myung Moon also claimed to be the second coming of Jesus. He claimed titles of, quote, the Messiah, the Lord of the Second Advent, unquote, and, quote, Father of the universe, unquote. Reverend Moon also claimed that Koreans were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Hodge and Patterson, 2015. It is clear that no explanation for the radically innovative ideas of these new religious movement founders can be complete without looking inside the head of these individuals. A scientific explanation must be able to answer questions such as how and why do NRM founders invent radically new ideas, and how and why do they communicate these ideas to others, and how and why others come to place their faith in these ideas. In a 2005 article titled Towards a Cognitive Science of New Religious Movements, I argued that this can be accomplished by complementing the sociology of new religious movements by a cognitive science of new religious movements. The first goal of this book is to fill more details into the broad outline of the theory presented in that article by developing a multidisciplinary theoretical framework drawn from cognitive science of religion and social psychology, in particular social identity theory and leadership as social identity change entrepreneurship. The second goal is to illustrate how this socio-cognitive account of the origin and evolution of NRMs can be used to understand the origin and evolution of a real new religious movement, namely the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at. Section 1.3 Approaches for Studying New Religious Movements. Religion is one of the most fascinating aspects of human life. Since time immemorial, it has provided answers to ultimate questions of existence for some people from a variety of cultural traditions. It motivates some people to offer sacrifices for the good of their fellow human beings. It provides a sense of meaning to many people's lives. It brings communities together by binding people in social ties of friendship. While questions of the origins of new religious ideas may perplex modern people living in largely secular societies, they have not been systematically investigated until the rise of modern social sciences. Studies of new religious movements gained strength in the West with the emergence of Eastern-inspired movements in the 1960s. While there is no consensus on what constitutes a new religious movement, the label is usually reserved for religious movements of historically recent origin, founded in the last 200 years or so, that, quote, have been assigned to the fringe of dominant religious culture, unquote. This is a quote from Lewis, 2008, page 17. Bainbridge and Stark, in 1979, categorized the existing approaches to the origin of new religious ideas into three groups: the psychopathology model, the entrepreneur model, and the subculture evolution model. While the first two models emphasize the role played by individuals, in particular the NRM founders, the subculture evolution emphasizes the group interactions processes that can lead to the emergence of NRMs without guidance by any individual. I will spend time on the first two models because they are relevant to the development of a bottom-up model of religious innovation. According to the psychopathology models, NRM founders suffer from various mental illnesses which cause them to have psychotic episodes resulting in hallucinations of having received divine wisdom. Havelock Ellis suggested that most of the Israelite prophets were psychologically ill when he said that the whole religious complexion of the modern world is due to the absence from Jerusalem of a lunatic asylum, unquote. A view that is consistent with Freud, who considered religion to be a projection of neurotic wish fulfillment, which should be treated with therapy. Religious scholars George Feuerstein argues that NRM leaders are authoritarian personalities who want to control their followers. After examining a number of religious movement leaders, including Shabbatai Zwi, Jim Jones, David Koresh, and Rudolf Steiner, the British philosopher Colin Wilson concludes that NRM leaders have psychological problems similar to those suffered by serial killers, namely that they are driven by power and sex beyond the normal limits. A number of psychological problems have been alleged to result in the claims of special divine insight by religious leaders. These include epilepsy, hysteria, paranoia, schizophrenia. Mary Baker Eddy's inspiration of Christian Science is often cited as the classic case of hysteria. The British psychiatrist Anthony Storr argued that people such as Rudolf Steiner, Paul Brunton, Ignatius of Loyola, Gurdjieff, Rajneesh suffer from creative illnesses, unquote, that lead them to the creation of novel ideas. When the American scholar D. Harvey DeWitt Griswold, I'll tell you more about him later, asked an Indian Muslim about Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's claim, he was told that, quote, Mirza Sahib's brain has become meddled. Uska dimag baith gaya hai. This opinion concerning the Mirza Sahib is similar to the opinions of Festus concerning Paul. In connection with the theory of the Mirza Sahib's insanity, it may be without interest to mention that at least two persons in the Punjab who are acknowledged to be insane have lately claimed to be Jesus Christ. One is a weaver of Ludhiana and the other a former student of Foreman Christian College, Lahore. The madness of the latter takes the shape of writing periodical letters to the principal of the college, urging that his claim to the Messiah be speedily admitted. In the light of these facts, the theory that Mirza Sahib himself is insane is certainly a possible one." Unquote. Griswold, 1902, page 25. Another unnamed American psychologist who also visited Ahmad was so convinced that Ahmad's revelations were a result of a brain disease that he directly asked Ahmad, "Have you ever been affected with a brain disease? If so, what and when? Does it reoccur? Did you begin to have revelations before you suffered from an attack of such disease or after that?" Unquote. After narrating this incident, Reverend Harold Arnold Walter opines that "I am indebted to Professor D.B. MacDonald of Hartford, USA for the suggestion here advanced as perhaps best accounting for Ahmad's claims. And so-called revelation viewed in the light of our modern knowledge of psychology is that Ahmad, like his great leader Muhammad, the founder of Islam, is a pathological case. It is evident that from comparatively early days he had trances, fell into fits, in which he saw and heard strange things. There came to him voices either apparently in a trance condition or when he was awake. Driven by fear for his soul, he had got into the habit of retiring into desert recesses and there spending days in solitary prayer. So there the voices came to him, there he even saw figures, vague, dim, and the fear fell upon him. What are they? What is the matter with me? Is this of God? Or am I possessed by some divine spirit? Walter, 1902, page 45. The image of religious innovators as social deviants is so well entrenched in popular culture, perhaps thanks to the tireless efforts of quote-unquote cult hunters, that often little or no evidence is considered necessary to justify accusations of mental illnesses against them. However, as popular, widespread, and intuitive as this view is, we still must subject it to scientific scrutiny, so that we do not fall prey to what philosopher Dan Dennett calls premature satisfaction of curiosity. Let's take the mental illness hypothesis seriously and fully explore all its implications. One of the unfortunate consequences of mental illness is that people suffering from the illnesses are stigmatized in a variety of ways. Surveys show that such people are wrongly believed to be stupid, lazy, unpredictable, unreliable, and dangerous. This appears to be the case both in Western industrialized societies of North America and Europe, as well as in non-industrialized societies of Asia and Africa. Unlike religious innovators, whose adoring followers consider them as sources of divine knowledge, counterintuitive utterances of mentally ill people are ignored at best and ridiculed at worst. A recent survey of UK mental illness sufferers showed that a vast majority, 70%, reported suffering stigma as a result of their illness. A majority also reported being stigmatized by their own family, 56% of them, and friends, 52%. Similarly, a vast majority of Americans, 75%, consider mentally ill people to be dangerous. Furthermore, there is no historical or anthropological evidence that mentally ill people were respected for their wisdom and insight in the past. It is fitting then that life stories of religious innovators such as Ahmad show no history of debilitating mental illness. Not only were they considered normal and healthy by their peers, they were actually respected by their followers and sometimes even by their opponents for their intellect, their wisdom, and their insight. Dr. Griswold, for instance, describes that he found Ahmad to be about 64 years of age, venerable in appearance, magnetic in personality, and active in intellect. Griswold, 1902, page 1. Newberg and Dakili, in their 2008 book, Why God Won't Go Away, argue a subtly different position. They argue that some founders of religion were mystics who learned to experience a different state of consciousness through spiritual exercises. This extraordinary state of cognition offered these people a unique view of reality. which was more real than reality itself. After studying brain scans of Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns in meditation, Newberg and Dakili concluded that meditative experiences of these mystics were not delusions or result of emotional mistakes or simple wishful thinking, but were associated instead with a series of observable neurological events, unquote. They conclude that, quote, mind's machinery of transcendence may in fact be a window through which we can glimpse the ultimate realness of something that is truly divine, unquote. Newberg and Dakili, 2008, page 7. Another common explanation of the behavior of religious innovators is that they are charlatans, frauds, and con artists who make sensational religious claims for financial and material gains. Religious scholars Shoup and Bromley, 1981, summarize this view as arguing that religious movements are profit-making ventures operated by egomaniac charlatans for their own personal aggrandizement. Shoup and Bromley, 1981, page 186. A problem with this view is that a vast majority of religious movements make little or no financial or material profit for their founders. More commonly, the religious innovators end up losing their fortune, family, and friends because of their claims. They end up losing social and financial capital that it took them years to earn. Their willingness to suffer abuse solely because of their views and their refusal to reconsider their claims when presented with overwhelming material incentive to do so suggests that they sincerely believe their claims. Even though Ahmad's status as a feudal lord and the efficient British Indian law and order machinery mostly protected him from physical abuse, he still suffered tremendously because of his claims. None of Ahmad's family members who inhabited the same village as he accepted his prophetic claims. They included his first wife and their children, his siblings, his cousins, and his uncles. His cousins were so strongly opposed to Ahmad that one of them called him a cunning schemer. Griswold, 1902, page 25. Mirza Ahmaduddin erected a wall to block Ahmad's access to their family mosque, forcing Ahmad to go to court against Ahmaduddin. Strong opposition by Ahmad's sons and cousins also played a critical role in preventing Ahmad from contracting his third marriage. Having claimed divine support for the marriage, Ahmad had to suffer significantly when his own wife and son convinced parents of the young bride-to-be, Muhammadi Begum, to reject Ahmad's overtures. Anti-Ahmadi Muslims continue to use this episode in their polemic against the community to this day. One of Ahmad's friends and a prominent Ahl Hadith leader, Muhammad Hussain Batalvi, who had earlier played a critical role in promoting Ahmad as a defender of Indian Islam, renounced his friendship once he heard of Ahmad's prophetic claims. He swore to, quote, take Ahmad down, unquote. Batalvi traveled throughout India asking Muslim scholars to issue a fatwa of kufr, infidelity, against Ahmad. Kafir and infidel was not the worst name Muslims called Ahmad. Batalvi called his former friend by much worse names: raving drunkard, intriguer, swindler, accursed, the one-eyed Dajjal, slave of silver and gold, whose revelation is nothing but a seminal discharge, shameless, the ringleader of sweepers and street vagabonds, dacoit, murderer, whose followers are scoundrels, villains, adulterers, and drunkards. Dard, 1948, page 575. That the Qadiani is a Dajjal of his time, a second Musalama, perfidious, deceiver, cheat, liar, and impostor, and that he is the enemy of faith of Islam and all other heavenly faiths. Dard, 1948, page 608. According to Griswold, Batalvi was not alone in condemning Ahmad. Many North Indian Sunni Muslim leaders stood with Batalvi against Ahmad. In the numerous fatwas which Mohammedan associates all over India have issued against the Mirza Sahib, the strongest words of denunciation are used. Thus he is called kafir, unbeliever, Dajjal, antichrist, mulhid, heretic, murtad, apostate, kazab, liar, beiman, faithless, daghabaz, deceitful, etc., etc. With such epithets as these is the certificate filled with which Mohammedan orthodoxy has dismissed Mirza Sahib from its fellowship and service. Griswold, 1902, page 20. In his 1898 book, Kitab-e-Bariya, it took Ahmad 6 pages to summarize the damning words used by his former friends and supporters among the Ahl Hadith. As a result of the vitriolic anti-Ahmadiyya propaganda by Muslim leaders. On several occasions, Ahmad was physically assaulted by mobs when he traveled outside his home village of Qadian. In 1905, while lecturing in Amritsar, he was pelted with stones. When Griswold asked the aforementioned Indian Muslims about Ahmad in 1902, he was told that if Muslims such as the Amir of Kabul were in authority here, Ahmad would have lost his head. Unquote. This was by no means the isolated opinion of a man on the street, but always said the same thing. Had we been under Muslim rule, we would have given you a proper reply. We would have at once cut off your head with a sword and made you a dead body. Unquote. Two of Ahmad's followers, who had the misfortune of living under the authority of the aforementioned Amir of Kabul, were jailed, tortured, and publicly stoned to death. Their families were exiled to Turkestan. At each successive brutal step in their torture, they were offered a chance to recant their faith in Ahmad, but they refused, choosing death over worldly gains. If religious innovators are not mentally disturbed or charlatans, then why do healthy and seemingly rational human beings make the radical claim that they do? Stark and Bainbridge, 1987, developed their entrepreneurship model of religion to answer such questions. They consider new religious movement founders to be entrepreneurs who produce, market, and sell compensators in exchange for other rewards. A compensator is an unverifiable promise of a future reward that is in low supply or unavailable at present. According to the Stark-Bainbridge theory, in situations where some rewards are in low supply or not available at all, people are willing to accept compensators in lieu of the actual rewards. For instance, a religious founder may be able to sell the unverifiable promise of life after death to those agents that intensely value immortal life. Entrepreneurship theory's most useful contribution is highlighting the similarity between the role of an entrepreneur and a new religious movement founder, who also has to fashion a new product, market it, and sell it. Elaborating these similarities has allowed the use of economic analysis tools for explaining the higher rates of religious participation in societies with more religious pluralism, such as the United States, as compared to religiously homogeneous societies such as Sweden. However, the Stark-Bainbridge entrepreneurship model falls short of a complete theory, as it does not explain as to why NRM founders invent and propagate new ideas that seem so radical to most of their fellow group members, and why some people buy these ideas. In this book, I will reserve the term radical to refer to those ideas that are considered to be so outside the pale by primary target audience members, invariably the group members whose interests the NRM founder is claiming to defend, that they consider the NRM founder to be a deviant and not a full-fledged member of their group. The multidisciplinary approach I outlined in my 2005 article builds on Stark and Bainbridge's entrepreneurship theory, as well as developments in the new field of cognitive science of religion, social identity theory, and leadership as social identity change entrepreneurship. Cognitive science of religion assumes that ordinary cognitive processes result in creation and spread of religious ideas, and that special mechanisms devoted to religious cognition are not needed to understand religion. Barrett calls it the naturalness of religion thesis. Much of what is typically called religion may be understood as the natural product of aggregated ordinary, emphasis in the original, cognitive processes. This perspective may be called the naturalness of religion thesis. Much as language is naturally acquired as a result of cognitive preparedness, plus exposure to a typical social-linguistic environment, ordinary cognition plus exposure to an ordinary environment goes a long way towards explaining religion. Barrett, 2000, page 29. The cognitive science of religion, of new religious movements, which I proposed in 2005, subscribes to cognitive science of religion's naturalness of religion thesis and focuses on connecting macro-level phenomena of religion to micro-level phenomena of cognition. I assume that most NRM founders and believers are rational agents functioning in ordinary states of consciousness. The task for cognitive science of new religious movements then is to identify the ordinary cognitive processes that cause NRM founders and believers to behave in ways that most observers found outlandish, and result in social ostracization of the NRM founders and their followers by the very community they claim to be saving. We will see that many of these processes are social psychological in nature. They are initiated and led by people who believe that the religious group's prosperity will be enhanced through a change in their shared beliefs and seek to sell that message of change to their fellow group members. These community members who buy this idea become their followers, and those who seek to preserve the old belief system become their primary opponents and their chief persecutors. As we will see in Chapter 4, I caution against the tendency among some cognitive scientists of religion who argue that universality of cognitive explanations blunts the need for understanding the socio-cultural and historical context that leads to the creation and spread of radical religious ideas. Indeed, I strongly believe that an explanation of religion that focuses solely on universal cognitive processes that are common to all human beings is doomed to fail. Universal cognitive processes simply do not provide a complete explanation unless they are instantiated in a particular socio-cultural context that is investigated by historians of religion. Thus, a history of religion is and always will be a necessary complement for a cognitive science of religion. This also means that unlike most other cognitive science of religion works that you may have read, we will be doing a deep dive into the history of 19th century India to fully understand the context which led Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to develop his ideas that resulted in establishment of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at and led people such as my maternal and paternal grandfathers to accept his innovative religious claims. Section 1.4 Sources for the book. An interdisciplinary effort such as this must draw its sources from a variety of scholarly traditions. In the case of a cognitive science of new religious movements, theory and its applications to understand the origins of Ahmadiyya doctrine presented here, these include a history of South Asian Islam, particularly the 19th century, new religious movements research, cognitive science, and cognitive science of religion and social psychology. For history and doctrine of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at, AMJ, or movement hereafter, I use non-Ahmadi Western scholars as well as Muslim scholars, as well as Ahmadi sources as well. The early Westerners who wrote about Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at were Christian missionaries working in India. These include Reverend Robert Clark, the first secretary of the Church Missionary Society who served in Punjab from 1851 until his death in 1900. Clark's adopted son, Henry, and Ahmad debated each other, and following their debate, Ahmad was charged by police for ordering one of his disciples to murder Clark. Ahmad was later acquitted by the judge for lack of evidence. Missionary reports by Clark and others, such as Reverend Imaduddin, published in Church Missionary Intelligencer, offer a rich source of not only missionary perceptions of Ahmad and other Punjabi Muslims and their strategies for converting Muslims, but also the broader socio-cultural environment in 19th century Punjab. The earliest scholarly report on the Ahmadiyya movement was penned by Presbyterian missionary Hervey Dewitt Griswold, who moved to Jhansi, India in 1890. He seemed to have met Ahmad around 1900. He wrote his report on AMJ in 1902 and presented it to Queen Victoria Institute in 1905, 3 years before Ahmad's death. The American Methodist missionary Reverend Howard Arnold Walter published the first English language book-length treatment of the movement in 1918. John Nicole Farquhar, a Scottish missionary to India, included a discussion of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at in his 1915 book, Modern Religious Movements in India. The American Episcopalian missionary James Thayer Addison wrote an article on the movement for Harvard Theological Review in 1929. More recent scholarly publications include the books by Spencer Lawan, Johann Friedman, and Adil Hussain Khan, and an article by Shazi Ahmad. The primary Ahmadiyya sources is the approximately 50 Urdu books written by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, as well as his letters, maktubat, and pamphlets, ishtiharat. These are available from Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at's official website, alislam.org, as well as the website run by Ahmadiyya Anjuman-e-Ishat Islam Lahore. Official English translations of about 40 of Ahmad's works are also available from alislam.org. Unless otherwise noted, citations from Urdu books are my own translations. The secondary sources include the 5-volume Malfuzat, a diary of his utterances noted by 3 of his disciples, Maulvi Abdul Karim, Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, and Yaqub Ali Irfani, and published in Ahmad's lifetime, and the 8 of his Seerat biographies, also written by his disciples and published after Ahmad's death. The most extensive among these is the 3-volume Siratul Mahdi, written by his son Mirza Bashir Ahmad and published from 1927 to 1939. These are complemented by 21-volume History of the Movement titled Tariq-e-Ahmadiyyat, written by the movement's official historian Dost Muhammad Shahid and published by Ahmadiyya Muslim Jama'at's official press. My final source of information about Ahmadiyya belief and practices is my own lifetime of field observations as a lay Ahmadi, as well as part of the Ahmadiyya officialdom, as I held various offices in Jamaat's organization during the first 20 years of my life in Rabwa, as well as immediately after my arrival in Canada. By praying 5 times a day at neighborhood mosque and listening to the dars following the namaz, and particularly in Jalsa Salana, Atfal and Khudams and Wal Ijtimaz, Talimul Quran classes, Ramadan darases, and weekly Muhalla meetings, I learned Jamaat's version of its own doctrine and history directly from Jamaat's best scholars. These include Sir Muhammad Zafarullah Khan, Dost Muhammad Shahid, Malik Saifur Rahman, Abdul Malik Khan, Abdul Sami Khan, Hafiz Muzaffar Ahmad Sahib. I also had a chance to meet and listen to several aging companions of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad and Ahmad's grandchildren, including the 3rd and 4th Ahmadi Khalifa, Mirza Nasir Ahmad and Mirza Tahir Ahmad, respectively.